investigators documented two distinct patterns of blood spatter. DNA testing confirmed it belonged to Nancy Guthrie, the mother of Today Show host Savannah Guthrie. But here's what doesn't fit. There was no blood inside the residence. Not in the bedroom where she was reportedly taken from. Not in the hallway. Not near the front door threshold. Only outside on the concrete walkway leading away from her home. When blood evidence appears in only one location during an abduction, it documents a specific moment in time, the moment something changed. This is the forensic reconstruction of that moment. I'm examining the evidence that investigators have gathered in a case where an elderly woman vanished in the middle of the night, and where every piece of physical evidence raises more questions than it answers. If you're interested in understanding how forensic analysis reconstructs violent crimes, you'll want to follow this investigation through to the end. Blood evidence creates a map of movement and violence. When someone is bleeding from a traumatic injury, that blood follows them. It drips, it smears, it marks their path. The absence of blood in certain locations is as significant as its presence in others. Nancy's bedroom contained no documented blood evidence. The hallway connecting that bedroom to the front of the residence showed no blood. The threshold of the front door, the transition point between inside and outside, showed no blood. But approximately 6 to 10 feet outside that front door, on the walkway, investigators documented two distinct spatter patterns within close proximity to each other. Jim Clemente, a former FBI profiler with decades of experience in violent crime analysis, examined video footage of this blood evidence scene. His assessment begins with a fundamental question. How does an elderly woman with limited mobility move from her bedroom to her front walkway without leaving any blood evidence until she's already outside her home? The answer shapes everything we understand about this abduction. For blood to appear only outside, Nancy had to be uninjured during the entire time she moved from her bedroom, through her home, to her front door. She had to be ambulatory, walking on her own. And she had to be compliant, following the offender's directions without physical resistance that would have caused injury and bleeding inside the residence. This tells us the offender established control without immediate violence. According to Clemente's analysis, the most likely method was a visible weapon, specifically a handgun, used as a psychological tool. The presence of a firearm creates immediate compliance in most victims, particularly an elderly woman surprised in her own bed in the middle of the night. But compliance ended at the front door. Something happened at that threshold, at the exact point where Nancy would transition from inside her home to outside, from familiar territory to an unknown destination. That changed the dynamic completely. And that change is documented in the blood patterns investigators found on the walkway. Blood spatter analysis relies on physics. Blood is a fluid with specific properties: viscosity, surface tension, behavior under gravity. These properties are consistent and predictable, and which means the patterns blood creates when it leaves the body and strikes a surface can be read and interpreted. The footage Clemente analyzed showed two distinct patterns close together on the walkway. Within these patterns, investigators could identify different types of blood evidence that each tell part of the story. The first pattern contained both larger droplets and smaller droplets of blood. To the right of this central pattern, there was a smear, an area where blood had been deposited on the surface and then disturbed by subsequent contact. Blood spatter is categorized by velocity, which indicates the force that caused the blood to leave the body. Low-velocity spatter consists of larger, more circular droplets that result from blood dripping under gravity's force. A medium-velocity spatter creates smaller droplets and typically results from some external force being applied, coughing, beating, or other forceful expulsion. High-velocity spatter produces very fine mist-like droplets and is associated with gunshot wounds or explosive trauma. When Clemente examined close-up images of the central pattern, He identified characteristics of both low and medium velocity spatter in the same area. This combination is significant. The medium velocity component indicated Nancy's blood had been expelled with force, not simply dripping from a wound. But more specifically, some of the smaller droplets in this pattern were hollow. They appeared as rings rather than solid circles. This particular characteristic has only one explanation: aspirated blood. When blood enters the respiratory system and is then coughed out, air mixes with the blood inside the airways. When these air-filled droplets strike a surface, the air bubbles burst on impact, leaving only the outer ring of blood. The presence of these hollow rings confirmed Nancy was coughing up blood onto the walkway. At this stage of the analysis, we can confirm Nancy had sustained trauma significant enough to cause bleeding into her respiratory passages. The medical implications narrow the possibilities. Blood that enters the airways and is then coughed out typically indicates trauma to the face, specifically the nose, mouth, or sinus cavities, or potentially internal injuries affecting the respiratory system. But the blood pattern reveals more than just the type of injury. The directionality of the smaller droplets provided precise information about Nancy's position when this blood was deposited. Some droplets were elongated rather than circular, stretched in one direction. This elongation occurs when blood is moving at an angle when it strikes a surface. The degree of elongation and the direction of the tail on each droplet reveals the trajectory that blood was traveling. In this pattern, the directional indicators weren't uniform. The blood had traveled in multiple directions, creating a scattered distribution rather than a single linear pattern. This multidirectional distribution is consistent with coughing, where blood is expelled outward from the mouth in various directions rather than following one trajectory. The distribution pattern, combined with the size of the droplets and the presence of air bubbles, allowed Clemente to determine Nancy's position with significant precision. Her face was within 12 inches of the ground when this blood was deposited. Think about what that position means. An 84-year-old woman who had walked from her bedroom to her front door, showing no signs of injury up to that point, ended up with her face approximately 1 foot from the concrete walkway, coughing blood that contained air from her respiratory system. Clemente's assessment is that Nancy was either hunched completely over with her upper body folded forward, or on her knees and bent forward, or lying on the ground. The pattern itself suggested a hunched or kneeling position rather than lying flat, based on the dispersion of the blood. The larger droplets in the pattern, those showing less directionality and consistent with low-velocity spatter, likely represented blood that dripped from her face after the initial coughing. Once blood begins flowing from facial trauma, gravity continues pulling it downward. These larger drips would have formed as blood accumulated and fell from her injuries. The second major blood pattern documented by investigators was located near the first, showing similar characteristics. More medium-velocity spatter, more hollow ring-shaped droplets indicating aspirated blood, and additional smear patterns showing disturbance after the blood was deposited. The presence of this second pattern, so similar to the first, suggests Nancy remained in that hunched position for more than a single moment. She was down, she was coughing blood, and she remained in that position long enough for blood to accumulate in slightly different locations on the walkway. But then, the blood evidence stops. There is no blood trail leading away from these two pattern areas. No drips extending down the walkway toward where a vehicle might have been staged. No smears indicating someone bleeding was walking or being dragged. The blood evidence simply ends at this location. Clemente's interpretation of this absence is as significant as the patterns themselves. When blood evidence abruptly stops in a location where an injured person was clearly present, it means that person was moved in a way that prevented further blood from dripping. Given that Nancy had facial trauma significant enough to cause her to cough up blood mixed with air from her lungs, that trauma would have continued to bleed. Facial wounds, particularly to the nose and mouth area, tend to bleed profusely and don't stop immediately. For the blood trail to end where it did, Nancy would have had to be lifted and carried with her face positioned upward, preventing gravity from pulling blood down and out of her wounds onto the ground below. This wasn't Nancy walking away from this location. This was Nancy being carried by someone with sufficient strength to lift an adult woman and sufficient presence of mind to reposition her body to minimize evidence. At this stage of the investigation, we can reconstruct the sequence with reasonable confidence. Nancy was controlled via weapon threat from her bedroom to her front door. She walked under her own power, complying with the offender's directions. At the front door, the threshold between inside and outside, she resisted. The offender responded with immediate violence, most likely striking her in the face with enough force to cause significant trauma and bleeding. Nancy went down to her knees, or hunched over, close enough to the ground that when she coughed blood from her injured airways, it struck the concrete beneath her face. She remained in that position long enough to create two distinct spatter patterns. Then the offender lifted her and carried her away, repositioning her body to prevent further blood evidence from marking his path. But this reconstruction raises critical questions about who could have done this and why. We're examining evidence that most people walk past without understanding. The forensic details that reconstruct violence and reveal offender behavior. If you want to continue following investigations that use expert analysis to examine unsolved cases, subscribe to Investi Crime Files. We're building a channel focused on evidence-driven analysis, not speculation. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss developments in cases like this one. In the days and weeks following Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, multiple ransom notes appeared. According to Savannah Guthrie's public statements, she believes at least 2 of these notes were potentially legitimate, actually sent by the person who took her mother. One of these notes was sent to a local television station in Arizona. This detail alone is unusual and represents what Clemente identifies as a significant tactical error. Legitimate kidnappers, individuals who abduct victims with the genuine intention of collecting ransom and releasing the victim, almost universally avoid media involvement. The reason is straightforward. Media attention means law enforcement attention. Once news outlets are reporting on a kidnapping, law enforcement resources flood into the investigation. The FBI becomes involved. The case becomes high profile. Every aspect of communication and potential exchange becomes exponentially more dangerous for the offender. Professional kidnappers want secrecy. They want the family to believe they have no choice but to pay quietly without involving authorities. They threaten the victim's life if police are contacted precisely because publicity increases their risk of apprehension. By sending ransom notes to television stations, this offender guaranteed maximum publicity. He ensured law enforcement would be fully engaged from the beginning. He eliminated any possibility of a quiet, secret exchange. This choice reveals either a fundamental misunderstanding of how ransom situations actually work, or it suggests publicity itself was part of his motivation. But the ransom situation becomes even more contradictory. Within the past several weeks, new information emerged about the ransom note sent to the television station. The note included a Bitcoin account, a cryptocurrency wallet where ransom payment could be deposited. When investigators examined the blockchain records associated with that Bitcoin account, they discovered something significant. On February 10, 2025, someone deposited a small amount of money into that account. The transaction was accompanied by a message: "We are ready to talk. Contact us." According to available information, this message appears to have come from the Guthrie family, or possibly from law enforcement working with the family. It was an attempt to establish contact, to open a line of communication that could potentially lead to Nancy's return, or at least provide proof she was still alive. There was no response. After that February 10th deposit and message, the Bitcoin account showed no further activity. Whoever had set up that account and sent that ransom note demanding payment never replied to the family's attempt to communicate. This silence is difficult to explain if the primary motivation was financial. Ransom situations depend on communication. The person holding the victim needs to prove they have the victim and that the victim is alive. They need to make demands, set terms, establish how and when the exchange will occur. The family reaching out and expressing willingness to talk should have prompted a response. Negotiations, demands, proof of life, something. The complete absence of response after the family reached out suggests something went fundamentally wrong. Clemente's assessment, based on decades of experience with kidnapping cases, is that Nancy may have died around this time frame, or the offender may have realized he no longer had what the family wanted, that he could no longer deliver on the implicit promise of a ransom situation, which is the safe return of the victim in exchange for payment. Without Nancy alive, without the ability to provide proof of life, any further communication became pointless and potentially dangerous. Responding to the family's outreach would expose him to investigative techniques designed to trace contacts and gather information. If he could no longer deliver Nancy alive, engaging in communication offered no benefit and significant risk. This timeline, the family reaching out on February 10th and receiving no response, may mark a critical transition in this case from a kidnapping investigation to something else. So the evidence documented at Nancy's home reveals patterns of behavior that construct a profile of the offender, even though his identity remains unknown. The blood evidence location tells us he initially controlled Nancy through psychological means, most likely weapon threat, rather than immediate physical violence. This suggests someone capable of maintaining composure and control during the initial phase of the crime. But when Nancy resisted at the front door, his response was immediate and overwhelming. He struck her with enough force to cause significant facial trauma, likely a punch to the nose or mouth. This willingness to use sudden, severe violence against an 84-year-old woman who posed no real physical threat reveals important characteristics. For most people, the idea of striking an elderly woman is incomprehensible. The natural human response to resistance from someone vulnerable would be to back away, to abandon the plan, to recognize the situation has become something you're not willing to participate in. This offender had a goal, and he was committed to achieving that goal regardless of what it required. When Nancy resisted, he didn't hesitate. He didn't reconsider. He acted with immediate violence to overcome her resistance and continue with his plan. This level of commitment tells us his motivation was powerful enough to override normal inhibitions against harming the elderly and vulnerable. The single offender assessment comes from the blood evidence itself. If two people had been involved in this abduction, Clemente notes that Nancy likely wouldn't have been able to resist at all. With two offenders, one could maintain complete physical control while the other managed logistics. There would be no need for the psychological control phase using weapon threat, because physical control could be established immediately. The fact that Nancy was able to resist, even briefly, suggests she was dealing with one person who had been relying on the threat of the weapon to maintain control. When that psychological control failed, the single offender had to respond with physical violence to re-establish dominance. Additionally, the smear patterns in the blood appear singular rather than multiple. If two people had been moving through that scene, there would likely be more disturbance, more footprints, and more evidence of multiple bodies in that space. Understanding this was likely a single offender tells us about his physical capabilities. He had to be strong enough to overpower an elderly woman with a blitz attack, and then strong enough to lift and carry her body while also managing whatever weapon he had brought to the scene. But here's where the profile becomes more specific. The offender made mistakes. Multiple mistakes that reveal his level of criminal sophistication, or lack thereof. The surveillance footage captured him wearing a distinctive backpack during what appears to be reconnaissance of Nancy's property. The backpack style has been identified as commonly sold at Walmart stores and featured bright reflective straps designed to make the wearer more visible in low-light conditions. For someone attempting to conduct covert surveillance, choosing a backpack that makes you more visible represents a fundamental misunderstanding of operational security. The face covering he wore created another problem. Unlike a surgical mask that would have covered his nose and mouth completely and contained biological evidence, the mask he chose allowed him to breathe freely, which also meant it allowed hair follicles and DNA to escape and potentially be distributed wherever he went. These aren't the choices of a sophisticated criminal who understands forensic science and investigative techniques. These are the choices of someone who thought he was being careful, but didn't actually understand what being careful required. He wore a mask, thinking that was sufficient, without considering what kind of mask matters. He conducted surveillance without understanding how to avoid being distinctive and memorable. He sent ransom notes to media outlets, guaranteeing maximum law enforcement involvement when professional kidnappers work to minimize publicity. This pattern of near competence, of almost understanding what professional criminals know but missing critical details, runs throughout the observable aspects of this crime. Clemente believes these mistakes create opportunities for investigation and significantly increase the likelihood this offender will eventually be identified and caught. 2.5 months have passed since Nancy was taken. For the offender, those months have been a specific psychological experience that manifests in observable behavioral patterns. The first question occupying his mind is almost certainly whether he actually got away with it. Did he successfully conceal Nancy's body in a way that prevents discovery? Did he leave evidence at the scene that will eventually identify him? Are investigators closing in, or has the trail gone cold? Offenders in this situation become obsessive consumers of information about their own crimes. Clemente's assessment is that this person is almost certainly monitoring every piece of media coverage about Nancy's case. He's reading articles, watching news reports, following every development that becomes public. This isn't casual interest. This is compulsive monitoring driven by fear and the need to know what investigators have discovered. He may also be talking to people about the case, carefully, bringing it up in conversations to gauge reactions and gather information about what others know or suspect. These conversations serve multiple purposes. They allow him to gather intelligence about the investigation's progress. They let him test whether anyone suspects him. And they create opportunities to establish alibis or alternative narratives about his whereabouts and activities. Physical changes are likely as well. Clemente believes this offender has probably altered his appearance significantly since Nancy's abduction. This could mean changing hairstyle or color, growing or shaving facial hair, changing clothing style, or any other modification that makes him look different from how he appeared on the night of the crime. If he used a vehicle in the commission of this crime, that vehicle has probably been altered, sold, or disposed of. Clemente references the Rex Heuermann case, where the accused Long Island serial killer sold a vehicle that investigators later determined had been used in his crimes. Offenders understand that vehicles can be identified by witnesses, captured on surveillance cameras, or contain forensic evidence. Some offenders create geographic distance after committing crimes, leaving town for extended periods under the guise of emergencies or family obligations. This serves multiple psychological purposes. It removes them from the immediate area where they might be recognized, gives them time away from the stress of being near the crime scene, and creates a narrative of having been elsewhere during the critical time frame when investigators are most actively working the case. But despite whatever precautions he's taken, despite whatever changes he's made to his appearance or circumstances, the amateur nature of his execution suggests he's likely experiencing significant paranoia. Professional criminals who have successfully committed crimes before understand how to manage the psychological aftermath. They know what level of concern is appropriate and what level becomes counterproductive. They understand how to appear normal while internally monitoring for threats. But someone new to serious crime, someone who thought they had planned carefully but is now realizing they made mistakes, tends toward anxiety and hypervigilance. They become paranoid, seeing threats everywhere, constantly worried that the next knock on the door will be police, that the next news report will reveal evidence that identifies them. This paranoia often manifests in observable behavioral changes: increased alcohol or drug use to manage anxiety, sleep disturbances from stress and fear, mood changes that people close to them notice, social withdrawal or conversely increased social engagement as they try to appear normal, changes in work performance or attendance, unusual interest in the investigation or complete avoidance of any discussion about it. People who know this offender may have noticed these changes without understanding what they mean. The question of why Nancy was targeted remains partially unanswered, but the evidence and behavioral analysis narrow the possibilities. If financial motivation was primary, the ransom scenario makes limited sense. Why send notes to media? Why never respond to the family's willingness to communicate? Why target an elderly woman with limited mobility who would be difficult to keep alive over the extended time frame ransom situations typically require? These contradictions open alternative motivation frameworks. One possibility Clemente has raised publicly is stalking behavior focused not on Nancy, but on her daughter Savannah. In this framework, Nancy's abduction wasn't primarily about Nancy at all. It was about forcing Savannah's attention, making her focus on the offender's demands, causing her to suffer publicly. The ransom notes sent to media would serve that purpose perfectly, ensuring Savannah's pain and fear would be broadcast widely. Savannah did make public appeals for her mother's return. She appeared on television pleading with whoever took Nancy. Her emotion was visible and public. For someone whose goal was to hurt her emotionally or force her attention, the crime succeeded even without any ransom payment. He took something precious from Savannah. He made her suffer. He dominated the news cycle and her life. Another possibility involves some previous connection between the offender and Nancy or her family. He might have worked on the property doing maintenance or repairs. He might have provided delivery or transportation services. These tangential connections create opportunities for seemingly innocent interactions that offenders exploit. A service provider learns the layout of the property and the routines of the household. A delivery driver learns who lives at an address and their schedule. A rideshare driver has extended private time with the victim where personal information might be shared. Any of these interaction points could have provided the offender with critical information: that Nancy lived alone, making her vulnerable; her connection to Savannah, suggesting potential for ransom, or opportunity to develop a fixation during these interactions. Investigators have almost certainly explored these possibilities, running down every service provider and contractor who had documented interaction with Nancy's household. But solving cases like this often depends on someone recognizing behavioral patterns in someone they know and making the connection to the crime. It depends on someone remembering a conversation that seemed odd at the time, but now takes on new significance. It depends on someone overcoming their reluctance to report suspicions about a friend, family member, or coworker. At this stage of the investigation, law enforcement is working with specific categories of evidence. Physical evidence from Nancy's home, including any DNA recovered from surfaces the offender touched. This evidence can be analyzed through forensic genetic genealogy, the same technique that has solved decades-old cold cases by identifying offenders through family members who have submitted DNA to ancestry databases. The distinctive backpack captured in surveillance footage creates a specific item for witnesses to remember and potentially connect to someone they know. The Bitcoin account continues to be monitored for any activity, though the likelihood of the offender returning to it after months of silence is low. Surveillance footage from cameras throughout the area continues to be reviewed, looking for vehicles, patterns of movement, or identifying details. We don't know the full extent of what law enforcement has gathered. Investigations at this level involve information that isn't released publicly. Witness statements, forensic results, digital evidence, behavioral analysis, all of which create investigative leads that may not be visible to outside observers. What we can confirm is that this case remains active and unsolved. Nancy Guthrie has not been located. No arrests have been announced. The person who took her from her bed in the middle of the night remains unidentified. For Savannah and her family, this means living with uncertainty, not knowing where Nancy is, whether she's alive, who took her, or why. That uncertainty is its own form of trauma, different from but no less painful than confirmed loss. The guidance from law enforcement to the public remains consistent. If you have information about Nancy's disappearance, if you've noticed behavioral changes in someone you know that began around the time of her abduction, if you've heard anything that seems relevant, contact law enforcement. The smallest detail might be the piece that completes the puzzle. Someone who seemed unusually interested in this case. Someone whose work schedule or personal circumstances changed suddenly in mid-December. Someone who left town unexpectedly. Someone who altered their appearance. Someone who sold a vehicle. Someone who made comments about Savannah Guthrie or her family that seemed excessive or unusual. The blood evidence on Nancy Guthrie's walkway documented a specific moment. The moment an elderly woman made a decision to resist her abductor, understanding that the threshold of her front door represented her last chance. The moment that resistance was met with immediate, overwhelming violence. And the moment she was overpowered and carried away. That evidence, analyzed frame by an expert who has spent decades reconstructing violent crimes, reveals not just what happened to Nancy, but characteristics of the person who took her. Someone willing to severely injure an elderly woman to accomplish his goal. Someone who made amateur mistakes despite attempting to plan carefully. To someone likely experiencing significant paranoia and making behavioral changes that people around him may have noticed. Someone whose motivation was powerful enough to carry him through significant obstacles and immediate violence. The forensic details, as clinical and technical as they are, represent a human being's suffering. They represent a daughter's loss. They represent unanswered questions that weigh on everyone who knew Nancy and everyone following this case. But they also represent opportunities for investigation. Every droplet, every smear, every pattern tells part of the story. DNA potentially left at the scene creates avenues for identification. Amateur mistakes create vulnerabilities. Behavioral changes create observable patterns. Jim Clemente's professional assessment is that this offender will be caught. The mistakes are too significant, the evidence is too substantial, and the psychological pressure of living with what he's done will eventually manifest in ways that lead investigators to him. This analysis represents what we can determine from available evidence and expert interpretation. As new information emerges in Nancy Guthrie's case, we'll continue examining it through the lens of forensic science and behavioral analysis. Subscribe to Investi Crime Files for ongoing coverage of this case and detailed investigations into criminal evidence that reveals truth. If you found this analysis valuable, hit the like button and share it with others interested in understanding how investigations actually work. Not speculation, not entertainment, but evidence-driven analysis that respects both the victims and the investigative process. The answers to what happened to Nancy Guthrie are still being pursued. And somewhere, someone knows something that could help bring those answers to light.